The working day ended before the sun dared warm a corner of Seoul's sky. The clang of machinery was replaced by the shuffle and mutter of men clocking out, all of us anxious to get home to our own small comforts. I peeled off my gloves by the entrance and wiped my brow with the back of my wrist, trying not to think about the cold. The metallic tang of oil and sweat hung in the air, clinging to my hair and clothes. Every part of me was sticky from labor and restraint. We filed out one by one, silent as a funeral procession. The foreman, Mr. Kim, hunched beneath the sodium light at the security gate, glancing at his clipboard, eyes flicking down to my name. Lee Min-jun, he called, voice flat as plywood. I stepped forward, trying to straighten my spine. He handed me an envelope. I saw the slump in his shoulders before I even touched it. My hands closed over the paper, and for a moment he didn't let go. "You knew this was coming," he said, so low only I could hear. Then he released it and with a half-hearted jerk of his chin, moved on to the next exhausted soul. Outside, the wind cut through my jacket, sharp as broken glass. I opened the envelope and stared at the words that meant the end, dismissal due to restructuring, and pushed the idea of future as far from my mind as I could. I considered lighting the paper on fire just to be warm. My uncle's house was barely awake when I arrived. He muttered something about unemployment in this generation while pouring coffee into a chipped mug. My cousin Jae-hoon never looked up from his game. I slipped off my shoes quietly, pretending to take up as little space as possible. "So, sound designer now, Min-jun?" my uncle asked, a smile lurking at the edges of his mouth, more pity than kindness. I nodded and set the envelope on the table. "It's what I want, Samchun." He gave a single sharp laugh, then took a noisy sip. "Sound designer, not engineer, not doctor, not even a teacher. Do you even know what that is, Jae-hoon? Your Hyung wants to make video game noises for money." Jae-hoon snickered, mashing buttons on his controller. I took my coffee to my room. As I closed the door, I heard my uncle mutter, "Ridiculous. Music is a hobby, not a way to survive." The room was small, shared with boxes my cousin insisted were full of valuable things, but sounded empty when shifted. I sat on the edge of the cot, shoes still on, staring at the scratched plastic keyboard resting on my desk. My laptop, second-hand and battered, waited for me to unlock its sleeping screen. Every night was the same. Put on headphones, search for the sound, the one that would take me away. Trying to tell people why sound mattered was exhausting. My mother, when she was still alive, would let me listen to the way rain sounded against the window and tell me that music was everywhere if you paid attention. But when she died and my father followed soon after, nobody else seemed to hear it. I wanted to craft those invisible landscapes, to be the architect of air. But here I was, dismissed from the assembly line, balancing shame and hope like I carried them in each hand, equally weighted. I posted in online forums, offered free help editing podcast intros, sent polite messages to indie game developers, and fell asleep on layers of unfinished tracks. At dinner, I could feel their eyes on me. My uncle would say, "Any news, Min-jun? Did Spielberg call yet?" My aunt, kinder but weary, would sigh as if she could will me into practicality. The only supporters I could claim were half-heard praise from strangers whose usernames I didn't know, an anonymous nice mix from a music forum at 3 am. Rejection was daily bread. I learned to swallow it without making a face. But patience, like water dripping on rock, started to carve something inside me. I got better. Unpaid gigs became small paid ones. An indie film director in Busan, desperate for a soundscape, gave me my first real chance. I composed night markets, bustling crowds, and distant thunder. I sent my files, each one polished for hours, for a fee just enough to cover my monthly bus fare. When I called home with the news, my first project credit, my uncle laughed. "Tell your cousin," he said, his voice thick, "maybe he'll be inspired to chase silly dreams too." Jae-hoon didn't look away from his phone. "Just call me if you're ever in a real movie, Hyung," he scoffed with a twist of his lips. Sometimes I wondered if I was being naive. I envied the people with solid plans, civil servants, teachers, engineers. My ambitions seemed translucent by comparison, flickering with every ignored message, every bounced email. But I clung stubbornly to the thin thread of possibility, determined to follow it wherever it led, like a faithful dog on a long leash. 2 years later, I was still moonlighting at convenience stores between sound jobs. On shifts, fluorescent bulbs hummed above me while I edited field recordings on my phone, hidden behind the till. Once a woman asked if the radio was broken. I realized she'd overheard an ambient loop I'd been stitching together for a meditation app that might pay W30000 if accepted. She wrinkled her nose. Sounds like static, she muttered, shuffling away. I smiled after her, trying to not let it land, but the cracks started to show in my uncle's voice. Are you helping with rent this month? Didn't you just get a job? My cousin wondered aloud if maybe I should work at his company, a logistics firm north of the river, just for a year or two until the real jobs come. By then I had found another place, tiny, damp and barely larger than a storage locker, but mine. The walls were thick enough to block the shouts from the street. I papered them with lists, sound libraries to build, competitions to enter, creators to study. Every so often I allowed myself a memory, a corner of my mother's smile when a melody played, the warm hush of her hand on my hair. On my 27th birthday, I entered a sound design contest sponsored by a major game studio. The prompt was deceptively simple: create a sonic world for a fantasy city. I worked all night, layering wooden sandals on cobblestone, hawkers' calls, distant temple bells, a touch of wind through the narrow streets. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the old alleys near the Han River, the way morning sounded before the city woke. I submitted my entry with a flutter in my chest. Weeks bled by, slow as rainfall on pine needles. I tried not to hope. Then at 3 in the morning my email chimed. Congratulations. Your design has been selected for Yongsan Studios' upcoming title. We'd like to offer you a contract. I read it 6 times, breathing shallowly, heart a rabbit in its burrow. The next day I signed my first professional contract, stifling the urge to shout. For once, rejection was nowhere to be found. The work was harder than I could have imagined. The deadlines snapped like winter branches, but every file I sent was met with real feedback, real attention. I worked with programmers, artists, and narrative designers, trading ideas at dawn over coffee in studios where the air hummed with ambition. The finished game would premiere at a major convention, one I'd watched on TV since high school. My name would scroll in the credits, a testament not only to my work but to the grind that shaped it day by cold and hungry day. Invitations arrived for a launch party in Gangnam, a glassy hall alive with velvet ropes, tech booths, and giant screens showing fragments of the game's world. I was allowed 2 guests. For a long time, I hovered over the RSVP, unsure if I wanted anyone from home in that world. But then I thought of my aunt, always tired but always listening, and Jae-hoon, who still ribbed me but had once told his girlfriend I was working in games or something. And my uncle, who, for all his sharpness, had never driven me out, who had once spoken proudly of his foster son when drunk on soju to old friends. I called home and told them about the invitation. My uncle's voice was suspicious. So now that you're in Gangnam, you'll show us how far you've come, eh? He laughed, but not unkindly. Driving in from Doksan, the cab took us past old factories and schoolyards, across a city still waking from its own industrial dreams. My cousin wore his best collared shirt, my aunt fussed over his hair as though he was 12. My uncle was silent most of the way, staring out the window. The entrance hall pulsed with low bass and blue light. A hostess guided us in, writing our names on badges and handing us gift bags with slick logos. Screens looped the game's cinematic, a fantasy city alive with merchant calls, temple gongs echoing across marble canals, footsteps resonating on stone. People buzzed around demo stations. I tried not to fidget, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from my second-hand suit. A producer recognized me and waved me toward the stage. Sound lead, right, we want you up front for the reveal. He handed me a microphone. After the gameplay clip, we'll bring you on to talk about bringing the city to life. My uncle watched, arms crossed, as I walked onto the stage. The host welcomed me, reeling off my credits, small things now elevated by context. The lights dimmed and the screen came alive. The demo played, my city spread out across the canvas, the night air thick with rain and market shouts. Every footstep, every clap of thunder, every gentle crane call was crafted in my old one-room apartment. The laughter in the distant alleys that was my own pitched and echoed. A hush fell over the audience as the demo ran. I could feel their attention coalesce around the sound, the hush as thick as velvet. Afterward the questions came, and I answered softly but clearly, explaining how you could give a stone the history of 100 years through the way wind rolled over it, or how a single bell could root you in a neighborhood with its tone. Faces in the front row nodded, scribbling notes. When I stepped off the stage, my uncle was there, holding the event's glossy program. He looked from the booklet to me, confused and skeptical, as if unable to reconcile the pieces. "Those sounds, you made all that?" I nodded, a tightness in my throat threatening to undo me. He flipped through the credits again, his finger lingering on my name. Jae-hoon looked up, his mouth a perfect circle. That's you right there. Lee Min-jun's. My aunt's eyes were glassy, half in amazement, half in motherly pride. We heard your sounds, she whispered. It's beautiful. Other guests came by to shake my hand. The studio president, all suit and champagne, boomed. We need more talent like Min-jun here. I saw my uncle tilt his head, measuring me against the memory of the cautious boy who had hidden his music behind closed doors. After the party, we walked out into the Seoul night. The city was alive, blinking, the air laced with promise. My cousin nudged me. Hyung, can you really make people feel something just with noise? I smiled, finally, the nerves slipping away. Not noise, Jae-hoon, sound. The world is made of it if you know how to listen. My uncle walked a little ahead, silent, crumpling the event program in his old workman's fist. He didn't say much as the cab carried us home, but his gaze out the window was softer, as if seeing possibilities mapped along each streetlight. A week later, I visited him alone. I found him fiddling with his radio, trying to get a better frequency. He didn't look up. Your mom would have been proud, he said. The words hung in the air, too heavy to touch. I sat beside him in the tiny kitchen, letting the peace settle. The sounds of the city filtered through the window, the distant drone of traffic, the laughter of children in the alley, a bird's call echoing off the tiled roofs. All of it music, all of it mine to catch and share. Sometimes coming home is the hardest act of all, to return unhidden with all your scars and triumphs and be seen for what you truly are. Now, when I walk through those old streets, I listen deeply, hearing not just the noise but the promise inside it. I recognize the voices, old men playing Go, teenagers chasing buses, the bell from the temple at the hill's crest. Each one rings true, each one part of the symphony I'd chased so long. The ridicule has faded, replaced by a quieter acceptance, a respect shaped by patience and years. My uncle calls my name now not with scorn but with pride. My cousin asks if I'll teach him to make beats, grinning in the kitchen over spilled noodles. My aunt sits by the window sometimes, listening to the city, and I think she hears the music in it at last. And for myself, well, shame is a smaller thing now, a shadow I've long outgrown. On quiet mornings before the world wakes, I close my eyes, take in a deep breath and hear it all, the world's heartbeat and my own in perfect tune.